Hi, my name is Renier Vanderlee for the people who do not know me yet. I am a member of the Small Winegrowers Association in Temecula. I grow Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. My vineyard is 4 acres. I would like to show you a new technology that uses satellite technology to measure irrigation status of your vineyards and actually can measure soil moisture status of your fields, which is pretty amazing when you think of it, and it's also very cost efficient. Now, why would you want to measure soil moisture? Why would you manage your irrigation? So far it's been pretty hard to determine without any tools how much and how often you need to irrigate, and we've been working on tools to help growers understand this and improve irrigation. So when you're thinking about irrigation, you would think about water usage, and the effect on yield is maybe secondary. But on the other hand, we're farmers. We get paid for the tonnage that we produce at harvest. So understanding how irrigation affects your yield is also very important. I took I tried some tests last year, and you can see the result here taken from my vineyard, where I was comparing a vine that was very well irrigated versus a vine that was less irrigated. And the reason is that the distribution efficiency of my irrigation system is not optimal. So I have parts in my vineyard that are traditionally well irrigated versus other areas where the vines are struggling because they don't get enough water. So I took, just before veraison, end of July last year, I took grape clusters from both vines and I compared them, and I counted the number of berries per cluster, which was actually approximately the same, and I also weighed the weight per berry, which was about half the weight for the reduced irrigation vine versus the full irrigation vine. So mid-season I already could see that the vines that were stressed produced less yield. Now I did the same later in the season, just before harvest. So this is the same vineyard. These are grape clusters taken from the same vines or about the same area, and you can see here that the weight difference of 50% persisted during the season. So I could see the difference in weight just before veraison, and then just before harvest I could see that that weight difference was still there. So here you can see that by stressing your vines, you can actually reduce your crop with 50%. I also took grape clusters from my neighbor's vineyard, Frank, who basically grows Roussanne, and you can see here that the weight difference is even more pronounced. I didn't weigh the berries individually, but you can see here that on the left side you see grape bunches that were taken from an area that was well irrigated, whereas the other on the right side was taken from anywhere in the vineyard actually. So you can see that this was traditionally irrigated, and there was one area that had a little bit more water than the rest, and you can clearly see the difference. This is probably a factor 3 or 4 more in weight if you irrigate more. So if you would translate that into yield, it would mean a lot of money for a grower that is being lost here. So I hope this explains why irrigation is important. Now I want to go to the product that I want to discuss. Irriwatch was just founded. It's a new company. It started 2 months ago, and the founder is a Dutch professor. His name is Wim Bastiaanse, and he has been working on the methods that is behind this product for more than 30 years, together with a team of PhDs. His background is soil physics and irrigation, so I think when we're talking about irrigation, you cannot find a more knowledgeable person than Mr. Bastiaanse, Professor Bastiaanse. So the model that he developed, we can discuss that, you know, offline. I don't want to go into the details and the technicalities of how this technology exactly works. I want to use this time to explain what it does and how you can use it. So here you can see the good professor showing two sugar beets. One is well irrigated and the other one is a little less irrigated, and you can see a significant size in weight, of course, here. So this is satellite technology. It's remote sensing, and you don't require any hardware on the ground. It's basically a subscription that you can take online, and then you basically send in the location of your fields, and the company draws it into a map, and from that day onwards you can get information from your fields on a daily basis. So every time a satellite passes over your field, it takes pictures of it, and then the algorithm that Professor Bastiaanse developed basically calculates data such as soil moisture and the irrigation status of your field from that information. The satellite information is taken once every day. So what you typically can expect is that the data from the previous day will be available to you before breakfast. And that means that you can pull up your data when you have your breakfast, look at the status of your fields, and then decide which fields need to be irrigated this day or that day or not. With that, let's go to the comparison with traditional technology. So when we're talking about traditional sensor data, and I've been working on that for the last couple of years. So with traditional sensor data, you need to have hardware in the field. Here you see an example of our Arduino boxes. But yeah, you need to install it, and you need to have internet access local, which is not always available, especially in areas like Duluth. You may have areas where internet is not always available, and as such, this kind of technology is not always suitable for each and every location. Then the other thing is, of course, once you have hardware in the field, you need to maintain it. It's not a matter of set and forget, but there's data that you can get from sensors that you cannot get from satellites. We're going to go into that a little later. Then another thing that I want to share is that with the current technology that we have, you do need to do some manual updates in the model in order for the technology or the model to accurately calculate how much water your vines are using on a daily basis, and as such you can estimate how much you need to irrigate in order to compensate for that. So typically we use weather station information that provide a number called evapotranspiration. It's basically a reference comparing how much a piece of lawn or grass is using on a daily basis. And then we need a crop coefficient to translate that number to something that reflects what a vine is using on a daily basis. So that correction is called crop coefficient. And in order to determine a crop coefficient, you basically need to update the crop coefficient during the season. You can imagine that depending on the size of the canopy, the vines, and the temperature, of course, and weather conditions, your vines may use more or less water. So, after bud break, when there's not much canopy at all, the water consumption of your vines is actually pretty low. Whereas if you look at a sprawling canopy in the middle of the summer, then you can actually think of the water usage for a typical mature vine being 4 gallons or more per day. So in order to adjust your evapotranspiration and your irrigation models, you frequently need to measure or determine how big your canopy is. And there's two ways of doing it. One is shown on the picture on the left side, where you use a tape measure to measure the width of the shade at noon. So in this case, I'm just doing this measurement in my vineyard, and I measured 3 feet wide. And of course, if you're doing hedging or leaf pooling, the area of your canopy will change again. So if you're doing major changes to the area of your canopy, then you need to do this exercise again. A team in Paso Robles developed another method of determining the crop coefficient, and they called it the Paso panel. It's basically a panel with solar panels, and then there's a little voltmeter attached to the panel, and depending on how much shade versus how much part of that solar panel matrix is seeing direct sunlight, you know, the voltage varies, and they have come up with a way to calculate the voltage to what the crop coefficient is. So that's the Paso panel. But you know, the message is with our current technology, where we get weather station information from stations like CIMIS, for example, you also need to be careful about the crop coefficient changing during the season. And that is very important, because that determines how accurate your irrigation estimate is during the season. So with satellite data, of course, that can be all delivered by the satellite data itself. So these models that Irriwatch is using also produce a crop coefficient, and it calculates very accurately how much water your vines are using on a day-by-day basis. So that is very useful information. Now, when you're comparing you know, traditional sensors versus satellite remote sensing, there are things some technologies can do where other technologies cannot. And this table is a first try, a first attempt to show the difference. So with local sensors in the field, of course, you can get information from that spot only, whereas the pictures that satellites take of your field can give you spatial data. It basically shows you an overview of your whole field versus one specific spot. Then remote sensing or satellite data starts with fields of 1.5 acres. So if you have a smaller field that you want to measure, you cannot use satellite data. You need to have a local sensor with its station, of course, in place. Then the other limitation is that this is basically, you know, company specific, but Irriwatch takes minimal orders starting from 60 acres per order. So if you are smaller than that, and a lot of us are, you can basically pull together with a group of growers and then send in a joint order to meet the 60 acres. So that would be a good way to do it. And still get the advantage of, you know, the cost-effective data that you can get, you know, for your fields on a day-by-day basis. Then the data refresh with sensors in the field, you can get every 30 minutes an update, whereas the satellite basically updates every time a satellite passes your location. So with the Irriwatch data, that's once every day. With sensors in the field, of course, you need to take care of how they connect to the internet. So you need to have local connectivity solutions. You need to have local internet access, or you need to have like a sensor station that connects to a mobile phone network in order to get your data to the internet. Whereas satellite data basically already takes care of it from the sky. It doesn't need to have a connectivity in the field. And of course, that goes without saying, with sensors local in your field, you need to have hardware in the field that you need to install and take care of, whereas satellite data is kind of totally hands-off. There is stuff that satellites can do and I think as well as local sensors, but there is also a number of things that satellites cannot do, like measure the temperature, measure the humidity of the air, measure flow rate in your irrigation system and pressure in your lines. So there's a lot of things, and then there's derivative values like a mildew index that can be better done with local sensors versus using satellite data. Then of course it goes without saying that if you want to operate your valves in an automated way, or if you want to automate your irrigation, you need to have hardware on the spot in the field. So satellite technology cannot operate your valves, whereas an infrastructure that was set up for supporting in the field sensors can do that. Now there's of course a price difference. If you don't have any hardware in the field, you don't need to invest in that hardware. So remote sensing is considerably more cost effective than hardware in the field. For Irriwatch, it's less than $6 per acre per year, which is really a good deal for the kind of information that you get. And with sensors, $100 per year on average is not bad either. It's just that this satellite technology was not available since 2 months ago. So yeah, this is how new technologies basically provide alternative for traditional technologies. And then with that, I want to switch to a little product demo video that I made showing the PC application of Irriwatch. So we've been talking about Irriwatch and remote sensing for a while now in this presentation. Now it's high time to look at the actual application, check out what information it brings, and of course also discuss how to use that to optimize your crop results. In the picture here you see the screen that shows the map of part of Temecula. And this is showing Wilson Creek Winery vineyards. And in this case, we see a color-coded map that indicates the status of the irrigation of each individual field. So this is with a resolution of 30 by 30 feet. And I can also look at the individual blocks that are being drawn in. So this is, for instance, the Syrah. This is the Petite Syrah. And here the red block here is the Roussanne. So this is an indication that Roussanne needs to be irrigated a little bit more, whereas here in the Zinfandel everything is green, means that this block is well irrigated. I can look at other information. So this is high level information that just gives me an indication of whether I need to irrigate or not, which is great. This is updated once every day, so I can look at it at breakfast, and then I know for that day what blocks need to be irrigated. Another way of looking into more detail is looking at the actual soil water potential, which is another word for saying what is the soil moisture in the root zone. And you can see here that the color-coded things indicate that the average distribution of irrigation is pretty well organized here, which I would expect from Greg. And you can see also that the famous block X is well irrigated, as well as the Chardonnay or the Cabernet Sauvignon here, just around the restaurant and the back of the building. But everything else looks very homogeneous. So good irrigation job done here. Let's go back to the irrigation map and now zoom out a little bit, because I want to take you through my little vineyard here, which is here. And as you can see, it shows a little bit more information. I have one area here that's overlapping with landscaping and appears to be over irrigated. But for the whole of my field, you can see that it's a mix of well irrigated parts and probably irrigated parts that can be stepped up on irrigation. Now if I want to look at this in more detail again, I can look at the vegetation cover, and you can see here that this area is less vigorous than the area here. So that's giving me an indication. I can also look at the soil water potential in the root zone, and so you can see here that this is well irrigated and this is also well irrigated, whereas here on the red it indicates that it's pretty dry, which is true because it's a dirt road. So that is the clarification for this. So I can look at my field with a lot of information, and I also can see it in a lot of detail. So although this is 5 acres, you can also see that some parts are better irrigated than other parts. I also can drill down into the detail, and this is basically showing vegetation cover and field efficiency. So this means how much of the irrigation water is actually being used by the plant, and it turns out that the satellite data measures this to be 97%, so that's pretty good. I'm not wasting water here for sure. The other thing is I can see here the vegetation cover. It started earlier in say end of April with less than 30%, but because the vines are growing and the canopy is growing too, you can see that currently we're at over 40%. So that means that with a growing canopy, the plants also need more water. Another view I would like to show to you is this irrigation status. So this is the volumetric soil moisture. This is the line that basically indicates what the soil moisture is on a day-by-day basis in my vineyard. And this is measured over the whole field, so it's the average over everything. But you can see here that early when we started this, late April, there was still plenty of water. But as the plants were growing and the temperature went up, the winter rain water was pretty fast depleted, and then I needed to step up irrigation. As long as I'm in the green zone, I'm good. If I'm dipping into the red zone, that means that I'm getting a little dry. And the more I go into that red zone, the drier it gets, and the more the vines are stressed. So I will try to manage my irrigation in such a way that I just stay on top of that red zone. I never want to go below that I never want to go below that red dotted line, because that means that I'm basically pushing my vines beyond the wilting point, which is not good. Last slide I want to show you is an interesting one, which is information that I never had before, which is the crop production versus water unlimited production. This shows me the growth of my crop in actual terms, so the actual measured growth of the crop versus how much it would have grown with unlimited water. So it tells me on a day-by-day basis, based on how I irrigate, whether I am reducing my yield or not. If I irrigate enough, then there will be no difference between the water unlimited crop production and the actual crop production. Whereas if the growth slows down because the crop gets stressed, then of course I am reducing my yield. So you can see that this information is actually very important for me, and it really helps me to manage my irrigation according to my goals. So if I want to stress a little bit, then I have an indication that I'm doing that. Whereas if I want to go for maximum yield, I don't want to stress at all. And then these lines should be basically overlapping. So this is just a short overview and showing not all the information, but things that I think are important to know about this product that will really help you optimize your management of irrigation. Now that was cool, but there's also an app at the Irriwatch site. And I took a little video from the iPhone app that was recently released. Let's have a look.
Irriwatch is a new groundbreaking technology that helps farmers optimize irrigation for best crop results. It uses satellite imaging, and therefore no sensors in the field are needed. And now there is an app for the Apple iPhone. I just installed it, and I will show you how it works and what it looks like. So first I click on the icon, and immediately I get an overview of all the fields that are registered under my account. In this case, these are vineyards. So you see here a Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard, Chardonnay, Zinfandel. The color coding is here to indicate the state of the irrigation. This is updated on a daily basis. So every day I look at this during breakfast, and I know which fields need to be irrigated and which ones don't need to be irrigated. I can look into more detail here. So this shows me more detailed. Here you see the daily irrigation bulletin data about the irrigation status of this field. I can also look at soil moisture data, which is actually a unique feature of Irriwatch. It's the first technology in the world that can actually determine soil moisture at root depth using satellite technology. And then further, what I really like about this product is it can give me yield information which shows the actual biomass production or crop production, and it shows on a day-by-day basis how irrigation influenced the yield of my crop. So that's a very short introduction to Irriwatch and the Irriwatch app. If you want more information, I recommend you to download the app and see some demo field data. You can also start monitoring your own crops, and for that go to www.vinduino.com for a license. Thank you.
Now, that was totally cool. I hope you enjoyed the little video clips, and I hope it gives you some insight of what this technology can do for you and how it helps you manage your irrigation better. At least, it gives you more information, and if you're more informed, then you can make better decisions. Now, the big question, of course, for me was how does this technology perform? Does it really work? Seems too good to be true. So I was a little skeptical at first, and I compared the Irriwatch data in my vineyard with the sensor data that I have for my two stations. And as you can see here in the chart, when I was comparing the sensor data with the Irriwatch data for 1 week, it seemed like they were pretty much on par. And what I also found, which was a new insight, comparing 3 different sensors at one location, one buried at 2 feet, one at 3 feet, and one at 4 feet deep, where the satellite data has the unique feature that it measures the actual soil moisture in the root zone, which is pretty unique. I never saw that from any other remote sensing technology, but Irriwatch does it. And what I found was that the sensor buried at 2 feet aligned the best with the satellite data. So it may be a little early to draw that conclusion, but it could lead to the conclusion that most of the water uptake in my vineyard is happening in a root zone that is only 2 feet deep, whereas I was thinking before that my root zone was way deeper than that, probably between 2 and 3 feet. But it looks like it's more in 2 feet than anywhere else from the data that I'm seeing here. But this was 1 week of data, so let's look at it over a longer period. I had the Irriwatch application starting taking data from my vineyard since the start of May. So I have a full month of data that I can show here, and I've been comparing the Irriwatch data with the watermark sensors, the Vinduino stations in my field at 2 locations. And also I had the opportunity to borrow a pressure bomb from the University of California Extension, thanks to Carmen Gispert, who was so kind to borrow that device to me. And as such, I have pressure bomb data as well. Not as often, because it takes time, and it's kind of like cumbersome to take pressure bomb readings. But I have some measurement points here for 2 locations, and you can see here that the trends that I see in the Irriwatch data versus the sensor data and the pressure bomb data seem to align pretty okay. Please remember when you're comparing the charts that the Irriwatch data takes the total vineyard into account, whereas the Vinduino Block 1 and Block 2 sensors only measure, of course, at one specific spot. So they don't always need to agree, but in general you can see that the trend is the same. At the start of the month there was still water in the soil, and as the canopy was growing and as the temperatures were increasing, the water use of the vines increased, and at a certain point in time the soil moisture reached a point where all the water from previous rain events was depleted, and I needed to hit irrigation. So you can see that the soil moisture basically is reduced to a point where you can see here it hits this red zone, which is basically the area where you start to see stress in the vines, and stress means reduced growth and yield loss basically. And you never want to go to this dotted red line, which is the wilting point, where the soil moisture is so low. Actually, in our soil it's about 5% or less, that it could cause irreversible damage to your vines. So I've been trying to manage my irrigation in such a way that I'm skimming this line. I'm not, or only lightly, stressing my vines, and thus try to optimize my water use versus my yield, my crop yield and crop results. So it looks like 1 month of data pretty much confirms what I have been suspecting after 1 week, is that the Irriwatch data actually is pretty much on par with the data that I get from my sensors. So that's good information to have. Of course, this is just 1 month, so this is not the end of the story. I'll be following this closely for a much longer period, but I think this is very encouraging, and it also means that this is a useful tool for any grower to use, and it's affordable too. So there's some other stuff that I get as information that I never had before. One of the things that I wanted to show to you here is the crop production information, and this is related directly to yield. So remember when I started my presentation showing you the grape clusters using from non-stressed versus stressed vines, where you could clearly see a big difference in size. And this is where you can determine this on a day-by-day basis. So this chart that I can pull from Irriwatch on a day-by-day basis shows me that if the 2 lines are overlapping, there is no stress and there's no difference in growth between actual crop production and water unlimited crop production. But you can see here from May 4th onwards, you see that the lines basically separate. And that means that the brown line will show me what the water production is. What am I saying? The water crop production is with unlimited amounts of water versus what the actual is with the real irrigation that I'm doing. And you can see that the real plant is slowing down in growth due to water stress. So if I up my irrigation, then these lines are coming together again, and you saw that probably later in the charts that I showed before. So this is a new tool. It gives me information about how I need to irrigate, but it also tells me how irrigation affects my yield, which is information I never had before. So all in all, I think this is a very cool product, and I strongly recommend you looking into it. So with that, I'd like to finish my presentation with some takeaways. Crop production is farm income. You get paid by yield, and as a grower. So optimize your irrigation for best crop production, meaning that you're not irrigating too much, because then you're wasting water, but you also don't want to irrigate too little, because that would basically impact your yield and your harvest income. Technologies have their pros and cons. This Irriwatch data is actually pretty useful, I think, based on what I know, for managing your irrigation. But for pest management, it's not providing any useful information. So it cannot help you determining when you need to spray for mildew, for example. Then when you think about wireless or in the field sensing technologies, of course there's data that field sensors can provide to you that satellite data cannot, like a vertical soil moisture profile. You cannot get that from the satellite. You can get that from sensors in the ground. You can measure pressure in your irrigation lines, and you can measure flow rate using sensors. Satellite data cannot provide that to you. And satellite information or satellite data cannot automate your irrigation. You need to have equipment in the field that opens and closes your valves. So there are technologies that can do one thing, whereas other technologies can another thing. And of course, a combination of both is actually what provides the overall best solution. Now, this is new technology, like I mentioned. Irriwatch started just 2 months ago, so this is a new technology, and based on what I see, I am very encouraged with the results, and I strongly recommend everybody looking into this. It provides you better models for actual evapotranspiration. You don't need to manually update your crop coefficient. The satellite data can do that for you. And you can get new insights, like how your yield is performing for less than $6 per acre per year, which is an incredible deal. And of course it complements field sensors and irrigation automation. So it's something that is actually new, and I think it's very worthwhile looking into it. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your presentation with the small growers. Thank you.